Beep, 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 beep. Welcome to the Court of the EDI Jester. Hey, how you doing, peeps? You all right? How are you getting on in the swell of the sea of gender? How are you getting on in fighting? How are you getting on in doing your thing? March intake, warrior teachers, starting in March, third Thursday. Please do look at my pinned tweet and come along and join us. Subscribe, do the thing, all that. The usual, right? What we got today? I'm excited. I'm going to have a puff first. A moment of silence for Dennis of the Kavanagh. He's been at it again. Mr. Dennis, as Clive calls him on the Queen's Speech, their fantastic podcast, which if you're not listening to, please do. I'll put a link down to the podcast, which is now, I think they do it on Substack or they do it on one of a different channel than what used to be YouTube. Then it goes up on YouTube a couple of days later. So I'll put the link down. There's another Substack worth subscribing to. Real incisive wit and humour in their podcast, and as the two bounce off of each other. Although Clive does more of the bouncing than Dennis does. Isn't that right, or Clive? Comes back with his quips. Now, Dennis, he's been writing in Spiked. And it's got a great title. I'm loving the title already. Even before I read it, I was like, oh yeah, we'll have this. This is going to be a thing. And it's called Gays Against Starmer. Labour's embrace of gender ideology poses an existential threat to gay rights. This is by Dennis on the 16th of January. With his normal... here we go. This is Dennis all over. You could tell Dennis. You're like, who wrote this? Dennis. Right? See what I mean? With his normal anaesthetising delivery. He is dull and he's Starmer. God bloody hell. Hey, you'd drop off listening to him, wouldn't you? With his normal anaesthetising delivery, Labour leader Keir Starmer confirmed last week that he would defend female single-sex spaces in line with the Equality Act. What's more, he insisted, this has always been his position. Labour women, right? Is it Labour women and the other Labour groups have been overjoyed that Annalise Dodd has finally said some stuff that might mean they're going to do something about this. And my warning to them is don't do it. Don't fall for it for 1 second. Don't fall for it for 1 second. That's my advice to anybody who thinks they can vote Labour at the next election. It's just advice, right? And I know it's awful because you feel homeless, but the truth is you can't trust them an inch. They are ideologues, they believe this bullshit, and they will lie to get their way. It's that simple. Right? It's that simple. So when Dennis says that Keir Starmer has said it's always been his position, this will come as a surprise to many. In 2022, Dennis continues, Starmer was only too happy to triangulate on gender and tell us all, in his lawyer's way, that a small percentage of women do in fact have penises. Did you know that? Some women have dicks. Right? According to Keir Starmer. He also said at the time that the irritating question of whether women do or do not have cervixes shouldn't be asked. Well, that's not a question you should ask, whether a woman has a cervix. On Her Majesty's Secret Cervix. Cervix with a smile. Huh? Are you being cervixed? I love all that stuff, see? Mm. Yes. The underwhelming Labour Shadow Secretary of State. I mean, underwhelming. That's the only way to describe her. The underwhelming Labour Shadow Secretary of State for Women and Equalities, Annalise Dodd, right? She's just like... I want somebody to make a game, right? Do you remember that game years ago where you used to have faces? And what was it called? Who's, I think it was called. You had to bid for kids. And you used to put... I want them to do that with the Labour Party and the Tory Party. And written underneath Dodd, it'll have mundane. Gender-addled mundane. That's what it should be, right? So Annalise only adds to the confusion. She has promised to legislate for a ban on trans-inclusive conversion therapy and modernise gender recognition laws. It's nothing of the sort. It's the exact opposite. All in all, she sounds like someone fully prepared to sacrifice sex-based rights at the altar of gender ideology and children. She'll do anything, Annalise. Yeah. She's like a wicked Aardman character, isn't she? With Labour set to default into power, gay rights campaigners in particular are looking on with some apprehension as to what Labour's murky position on gender might add up to in government. This is because sex in law is foundational legal concept for the protected characteristic of same-sex orientation in the Equality Act. Starmer may talk of upholding the sex-based provisions within the Equality Act, yet his and others' support for the idea of gender identity suggests otherwise. Indeed, reform of the Equality Act is a long-held ambition of trans charity Stonewall. If it were up to Stonewall, gender identity would become a protected characteristic and there would be no single sex-based provision at all in the Equality Act. After all, if someone with a penis can legally demand to be recognised as a woman, then sex-based provisions in the Act are meaningless. Very true here, Dennis, you see, stating quite clearly that when we unanchor ourselves from our basic categorisation, then we're in real trouble. See, you don't want to disrupt the taxonomy. We already have a warning from Australia of what such a reform of the Equality Act would look like in practice. In 2013, the Australian government changed the Sex Discrimination Act by including gender identity as a protected characteristic. The biology-based definition of man and woman were repealed from the legislation and references to the opposite sex were replaced with different sex. Last year, the New South Wales Lesbian Action Group found out what this meant for the same-sex-attracted people. It was told by the Australian Human Rights Commission that a biologically defined female-only meeting of lesbians amounted to gender identity discrimination and thus was unlawful. Under an equality law rewritten according to gender identity, there are clearly two kinds of lesbians, the one with penises and the ones without. That's why gay rights campaigners are so worried by the prospect of a Labour government. There's no sense it really believes in sex-based rights. When Starmer tells us that 99.9% of women don't have penises, that implies he thinks 0.01% do. Such a view has serious implications for single-sex bases and associations organised on the basis of same-sex orientation. Labour's closeness to Stonewall does little to assuage the fears of gay rights campaigners over the party's direction of travel. Labour remains a paid-up member of Stonewall's workplace diversity scheme and seems oblivious to just how deeply lost their organisation is. After all, this is the very same Stonewall that has pronounced that 2-year-olds can be trans. There's more to the article. Please do go and read what Dennis had to say in Spiked. I think you'll find it very interesting. Labour are a liability. And I see these wonderful people who are involved in this fight who have done the most extraordinary things and yet they can't take their blinders off. Labour is a dead end. I'm not saying the Tories aren't. I'm saying that out of two unbelievably bad choices, you can't choose Labour. That you can't choose, because they're already taken over by the nutters. You know this as well as I do. And people are thinking, well, I'll go in there and I'll change it from the inside. We haven't got time. We haven't got time. They're sterilising and medicalising kids. We haven't got time. The only party that seems to be pushing away from this, in terms of being about Labour and Tory, rather than including, for example, Reform and other parties that are coming to attempt to become in power, is that this is the most dangerous of ideologies, and it should be a major plank in the upcoming general election, but it won't be. So few people know what's happening. I know people keep saying it's changing. That we've got years of re-education of folk, years of people having to engage with it at a deep level to understand truly what's going on. So thanks, Dennis. As always, a good read, including the bit I didn't read out. So do go and read it. Please do read the whole thing at Spike there and show them your support. Other than that, yeah, go on. Buzz off. God, I need a break. I'll see you later.